This is the 2020 Hyundai Venue, which is yet another SUV or crossover or whatever you want to call it. These days, you can't just make another crossover or else it will get lost in the crowd. You have to make it interesting, and the Venue certainly is that. Today, I'm going to review the Venue and show you what I mean. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for cool modern cars. If you're looking to sell a cool car from the 80s and up, Cars and Bids is the place. You will get the most money for your special car. And if you're looking to buy something cool from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place. We have an amazing selection with live auctions happening all the time. So check out carsandbids.com. First, a little overview. Now, about 30 years ago, the SUV really started to get popular. Then the large SUV started to get popular. Then the small SUV. Then the really large SUV. And now the new trend is the really small SUV. You have the Honda HR-V, you have the Jeep Renegade, you have the Mazda CX-3, and now you have this. This is a Hyundai Venue, which is a subcompact crossover with a starting price of around $18,000 and a 120 horsepower four-cylinder under the hood. Interestingly, Hyundai already has a subcompact crossover called the Kona, which is only a few $1,000s more expensive with 175 horsepower. So you can tell this segment is getting pretty crowded. And yet, the Venue has some weird quirks that help it stand out. And today, I'm going to show them to you. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the Venue and show you a few of its interesting quirks and features. Then, I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Venue on the outside, and I want to start with the white accents. You can see the car is blue, but there are quite a few white accents on the outside, starting with the roof. You can see that's a contrasting color in white, and that's not all that unusual. A lot of cars have white roofs these days. It's become kind of a trend. But there's a lot more than that. For instance, the rocker panels have this little white on them as well, a little white trim there, which I guess that's fairly okay. Looks interesting, kind of cool. But then we move on to some rather interesting pieces of white trim. Above the wheels, you have little white things just kind of sitting there on the wheel arch, front and back. Not exactly sure why or who thought that looked good. It looks interesting to say the least. Then you go around back and you can see the bottom of the bumper is also white trimmed, which again doesn't really fit, but it provides yet another white accent on the outside of this car. And next up, speaking of around back in the Venue, another interesting white trim piece is the badge on the tailgate. This is white, not silver like basically every other car. It's actually painted white to match the little white trim pieces theme in the exterior. And next up, another interesting item around back is the lights. This is the tail light housing, of course, and you can see when the brake lights go on, they're kind of angled to give this car sort of a distinctive look compared to crossovers with non-angled lights. Same deal with the turn signals. When those go on, you can see they are triangles. Again, another standout touch to separate the Venue from those regular, boring, non-triangle turn signal crossovers. Although I'm kind of kidding about that, I do actually like some of these standout crossover touches up front, and specifically the lighting situation up here. All right, you have two different headlight housings. On the top, that's the turn signal. So the upper light is not the headlight. The headlight is in the lower assembly here, the larger one, and the cool thing is that when the car is on, the running light is a little LED pipe that goes around this headlight assembly, and it just looks cool and very distinctive and kind of interesting. Of course, up front you also have more white trim. On the bottom of the bumper you can see there's more white here, again, to make sure you know the Venue isn't like those other non-white trimmed crossovers. And next up, we move on to the interior of the Venue, which is a pretty nice place to be considering that this one has a $23,000 sticker price. And I say that for a few reasons. One is just the look of everything in here, starting with the seats, which have this cool blue color to them. And also they kind of look like jean denim, and they're trimmed in leather with white contrast stitching. And it's just sort of a different special thing you don't really get in other crossovers. Now, interestingly, also on the seats, you have this design that looks like lines going in various directions. This is like the universal symbol for we wanted to do something different and cool, but we didn't want to do something too different and cool, and people would judge us, so we gave you lines. Now, beyond the seats, the other interesting thing in here is that there's a lot of blue everywhere. The dashboard is blue in this car. All the dashboard, not black or gray like everything else, blue. Same deal with the steering wheel. This isn't black, this is dark blue. And same deal with like the parking brake handle, also blue. And also blue, the stereo controls and infotainment controls, blue buttons instead of the usual black. So everything, again, a little bit different than what you might expect, especially if you choose this blue interior. And next up, a few other interesting things in here. One, drop the sun visor, open up the visor mirror, and you can see nothing lights up. Instead, there's a little manual switch you have to push to turn on the visor mirror light. Not automatic in the Venue. You have to do some work if you want to see yourself illuminated. Also interesting, over on the passenger side, you have the glove box below the dashboard, but above that, you have a little cubby where you can put stuff in sort of an interesting storage-related supplement to the glove box and dashboard. Now, beyond all of that stuff, I'm not going to cover the technology in this car because I've covered similar technology in a lot of recent Hyundai and Kia models, the Kia Soul, the Hyundai Sonata. I will link a few of those videos in the description below so you can go and check out my thoughts on Kia and Hyundai infotainment technology, which is pretty similar to what you have in the Venue. And next up, we move on to the back seat of the Venue, where there are two items to note. One is that there's not really all that much space back here. I have the front passenger seat where I would sit as a front passenger, and well, you can see what the result of that is. This is definitely not a vehicle you'd want to try to fit 4 adults in, or 2 adults and grown children. It's definitely for smaller families or single active lifestyle people. The other interesting thing back here is that the blue is carried over to the back seats just like in front. You have the same kind of denim look pattern on the seats, the same white contrast stitching. You even have white contrast stitched headrests back here, which is a pretty nice thing to see in the back seat of a $23,000 car. Looks more expensive back here than it actually is. And next up, we move on to the cargo area, where you can see that once again, it is blue. All blue back here. The plastic around, the carpeting, the back of the rear seats, everything is blue in the interior of the blue Venue. Maybe more important than that, though, is the sizing back here. It's pretty tight, as you can tell, but not that tight considering how small and inexpensive this car is. It's a reasonable size that should work for most people who are considering a vehicle like this. And finally, we move under the hood in the Venue, and you can see this thing's small 4-cylinder. This only has 120 horsepower and 113 pound-feet of torque. Really small numbers for a crossover, even a really tiny one. In fact, those figures aren't that much more than the original Mazda Miata had 30 years ago, and that car isn't exactly known for its performance. Now, those numbers are especially small when you compare the Venue to Hyundai's slightly larger subcompact crossover, the Kona, which costs only a few $1,000s more, and it has 175 horsepower. 50 horsepower is a big jump when the vehicle is only this large. So we'll see exactly how underpowered and slow it feels. Right now, I'm gonna get it out on the road. All right, driving the Hyundai Venue. Yeah, I don't normally review cars like this, little crossovers, but this one piqued my interest because it seems kind of odd. Now, I will say straight off the bat, I've already driven it a little bit, and it is slow. Slow, 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 slow. Now, I think this is aimed at people who like live in cities and just want a little crossover. Maybe occasionally on the weekend they'll go out of town to the country or whatever, and that's fine. If you're around town, it's no big deal. But on the highway, it is slow, slow, pros, though. Other than that, though, I actually think there's a lot to like here. The blue interior is a bit much, but I think people who want to stand out, they want something different, may appreciate that. Same deal with the white accents. Same deal, this car actually has a lot of stuff in it. I got heated front seats in here, I have a remote starter, I have a touchscreen with navigation, quite a few different safety features, all for $23,000. Not really so bad. And so if you don't mind having a really tiny little crossover, and if you don't mind having a not very fast crossover, there's actually some appeal here. One interesting thing I will say about the Venue, it doesn't really feel that high up off the ground. It's so interesting. People have given up on hatchbacks and cars. They just want crossovers. This one just kind of feels like a hatchback to me, not even really a lifted one. I bet the ground clearance is not that different from regular hatchbacks or a Honda Fit or something, and the height certainly isn't. It's higher, it feels like a crossover, but not that much. It's really more of an appearance thing. It looks like a crossover, so we call it one. For a $23,000 car, it's reasonably quiet in here, although I wouldn't say it's very quiet. It feels like a relatively cheap car. But when I think of entry-level Hyundai, I am reminded of the Hyundai Accent, which was just the crappiest little tiny base model car. And this is very much a step above what that felt like as like a tiny little hatchback. And so that's the 2020 Hyundai Venue. Honestly, if you're looking for a really small little crossover, I like this one. But then again, I also like the Hyundai Kona, which costs only a little bit more and is quite a bit quicker. And I also like the Jeep Renegade, and I like the Honda HR-V, and truthfully, this segment is so unbelievably crowded that it's just hard to stand out. Although this little thing does a relatively good job of that. Anyway, now it's time to give the Venue a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 43 out of 50 against some other relevant cars. The Venue's closest competitors here are the Toyota CHR and the Mazda CX-30. The Venue loses to both, but mainly because those cars are more fun and cool, while the Venue just isn't quite there. For the daily categories, the Venue is competitive with those models, and ultimately the Venue is a good, practical crossover with some neat quirks, though it's a bit underpowered.